restaurant was loud that night, the kind of loud that hides small cruelties in plain sight. Plates clinked, laughter bounced off the brick walls. A basketball game played silently on the mounted TVs while subtitles rolled across the bottom. It was the kind of place where nobody expected a moment to change their life forever. She walked in alone, one hand gently supporting her lower back, the other resting protectively over her stomach. 7 months pregnant, tired but determined. Her name was Emily Carter, and she had just finished a 12-hour shift at the hospital where she worked as a neonatal nurse. She didn't feel like cooking. She just wanted soup, water, and 10 minutes of peace. The hostess smiled politely and led her to a small table near the window. She sat slowly, exhaling as she adjusted the chair. Around her, people barely noticed, but 3 men at the bar did. They were loud from the moment they arrived, half-finished beers lined up like trophies. One of them noticed her first. He leaned toward his friends, muttering something with a grin. They turned, they stared, then they laughed. At first it was subtle, a glance, a whisper. Then it became obvious. "Hey, looks like somebody couldn't wait for the wedding," one of them called out. A few heads turned. Emily froze. She kept her eyes down, pretending not to hear. The second man chimed in louder. "You sure that thing's not twins? Or triplets?" More laughter. A couple at a nearby table shifted uncomfortably but said nothing. The third man raised his glass. "Hope the dad at least stuck around." The words landed harder than they knew. Her husband was deployed overseas. He hadn't felt the baby kick yet. He hadn't seen the latest ultrasound. He was serving his country while strangers mocked his wife. Emily swallowed the lump in her throat. She tried to focus on the menu. Her hands trembled slightly. The waiter approached cautiously. "Ma'am, are you okay?" She forced a small nod. "I'm fine." She wasn't fine. The laughter grew louder. One of the men stood up and exaggerated a waddle, mimicking her walk. "Careful, don't tip over," he joked. A few people chuckled nervously. Most looked away. Silence is easy when the cruelty isn't aimed at you. Emily pushed her chair back slowly. She just wanted to leave. As she stood, a sharp pain shot across her abdomen. She gasped quietly, gripping the table. The stress, the humiliation, the baby shifted hard. She closed her eyes, breathing through it. "Oh, is she going into labor?" one of them mocked. "Should we call Maury?" The joke was cruel, pointless, and it was the moment someone else finally looked up from the corner booth. He had been sitting alone the entire time. Dark jacket, short hair, still posture. He hadn't touched his food in several minutes. He had been watching, not reacting, just observing. His name was Daniel Hayes. To everyone else, he looked like another quiet customer finishing dinner after work. What they didn't know was that Daniel was a United States Navy SEAL on leave after his 3rd deployment. He had spent years in war zones where real enemies didn't hide behind cheap jokes. He had seen fear, he had seen courage, and he had seen enough cowardice to recognize it instantly. He stood slowly, not in anger, in certainty. The room didn't notice at first. The 3 men were still laughing when Daniel stepped between them and Emily. He didn't raise his voice, he didn't shout, he simply said, "That's enough." The words weren't loud, but they carried weight. One of the men smirked. "Relax, hero, we're just joking." Daniel's eyes didn't move. "She's in pain." The second man rolled his eyes. "Not our problem." Daniel took one step closer. The movement was controlled, deliberate. "It is now." Something in his tone shifted the air. The bartender straightened up. The laughter stopped. The first man squared his shoulders. "Or what?" It was the kind of question men ask when they mistake silence for weakness. Daniel didn't answer verbally. He simply held the man's gaze, unblinking, steady. Years of training lived behind those eyes. The third man tried to lighten it with sarcasm. "What are you, a cop?" Daniel shook his head slightly. "No." A pause. "But I protect people who can't protect themselves." Emily swayed slightly behind him. Another wave of pain hit. Daniel immediately turned to her, his entire focus shifting to her. "Ma'am, can you breathe for me?" His voice softened instantly, professional. calm. She nodded weakly. I think something's wrong. He didn't hesitate. He pulled out his phone and dialed emergency services while supporting her elbow. One of the men scoffed. You're being dramatic. Daniel didn't even look at him this time. You've said enough tonight. The operator answered. Daniel gave clear, precise details. Location, symptoms, estimated pregnancy stage. His tone was steady, authoritative. When he hung up, he addressed the restaurant manager who had finally rushed over. Clear a path, she needs air. The manager obeyed without argument. Authority doesn't always come from a badge. Sometimes it comes from presence. The first man muttered under his breath, unbelievable. Daniel finally looked back at them, not in anger, in disappointment. You saw someone vulnerable, and you chose to make it worse. No shouting, no threats, just truth. The ambulance lights could be heard in the distance now. Emily gripped his arm. My husband, he's deployed. Daniel nodded once. He'd want someone to stand up for you. I promise you're not alone right now. Her eyes filled with tears, not from humiliation this time, but relief. The paramedics burst through the door minutes later. Daniel briefed them quickly, stepping back only when they took over. As they lifted her onto the stretcher, she grabbed his hand. Thank you. He squeezed gently. Focus on your breathing. You're going to be okay. The stretcher rolled out. The sirens faded. Silence settled over the restaurant. The three men suddenly looked smaller. The manager approached them firmly. You need to leave. They started to argue, but one glance around the room told them they had lost the crowd. No one was on their side anymore. They paid quickly and walked out under a storm of quiet judgment. Daniel returned to his table, but he didn't sit. His appetite was gone. He paid his bill and stepped outside into the cool night air. The ambulance lights were gone, but the moment lingered.
He didn't think of himself as a hero. He thought of it as basic decency, something too many people forget when it's inconvenient. 20 minutes later, his phone buzzed. An unknown number. He hesitated, then answered. It was the hospital. Emily had listed him as her emergency contact witness. Stress-induced contractions. Early, but stable. They were monitoring her. Daniel exhaled slowly. Thank you, he said. He drove to the hospital anyway. Not because he had to, because he wanted to make sure she truly wasn't alone. When he arrived, he stayed in the waiting area. Hours passed. Finally, a nurse approached. Are you Daniel? He stood immediately. Yes. She smiled softly. She's stable. Baby's heartbeat is strong. She wanted me to tell you that. Relief washed over him in a way he hadn't expected. Can I see her? The nurse nodded. Inside the room, Emily looked exhausted but peaceful. She smiled when she saw him. You didn't have to come. He pulled a chair closer. I know. A small silence filled the room. She looked at him carefully. Are you military? He nodded once. Navy. She smiled faintly. My husband would have liked you. Daniel allowed a rare half-smile. Tell him I said thank you for his service. The next morning, something unexpected happened. One of the restaurant employees had recorded part of the confrontation, not the humiliation, but the moment Daniel stepped in. The video hit social media by noon. It spread quickly. The caption read, "Real strength is quiet." By evening, millions had viewed it. Comments poured in praising the stranger who stood up when no one else would. The three men from the restaurant were identified by coworkers who recognized them. Their employer released a statement about accountability and respect. Consequences arrived swiftly, not because Daniel sought them, but because actions echo. Days later, Emily gave birth prematurely but safely to a healthy baby boy. She named him Hope. When her husband returned from deployment weeks later, he asked to meet the man who had stood in when he couldn't. They met quietly. No cameras, no speeches, just a handshake that lasted longer than most words. Thank you for protecting my family, her husband said. Daniel shook his head gently, just doing what any man should. But they both knew that wasn't entirely true. Not everyone stands up. Not everyone steps forward. It's easier to stay seated, easier to laugh along, easier to pretend it isn't your problem. That night in the restaurant proved something simple and powerful. Strength isn't loud. It isn't cruel. It doesn't humiliate the vulnerable. Real strength protects. Real strength steps in. And sometimes it only takes one person to remind the world what courage actually looks like. The story didn't end at the hospital. In many ways, that night was only the beginning. 3 days after Hope was born, the video from the restaurant was everywhere. It had been clipped, slowed down, replayed, analyzed. People zoomed in on Daniel's expression when he said, "That's enough." Comment sections filled with praise. Strangers called him a hero. Some even tried to identify him, speculating about his background. But Daniel hadn't posted the video. He hadn't spoken to reporters. He hadn't responded to messages. He went back to his quiet apartment and continued living the way he always had. Early runs, disciplined routine, minimal noise. Fame meant nothing to him. Integrity meant everything. Meanwhile, Emily remained in the hospital recovering. The early delivery had been stressful, but Hope was strong. Small, fragile, but strong. Machines beeped softly around the incubator, steady and reassuring. Her husband, Michael, had finally arrived home on emergency leave. When he first held his son, tears rolled down his face without apology. He had missed the humiliation. He had missed the fear. But he was here now, and that mattered. Emily told him everything in detail: the laughter, the pain, the calm voice that cut through the chaos. She described how Daniel never raised his voice, never bragged, never hesitated. Michael listened quietly, jaw tight, not at anger at Daniel, but at himself for not being there. "You were exactly where you were supposed to be," Emily reminded him. "Serving." He nodded, but the guilt lingered. 2 days later, Michael asked if Daniel would meet him again, not for publicity, not for gratitude alone, for closure. Daniel agreed. They met at a small park near the hospital. No cameras this time, no viral spotlight, just 2 men sitting on a bench overlooking a quiet lake. Michael extended his hand. "I owe you more than I can say." Daniel shook it firmly. "You don't owe me anything." Michael studied him for a moment. Most people would have looked away. Daniel's eyes stayed on the water. Most people are afraid of conflict. They confuse discomfort with danger. Michael gave a small nod. "You weren't afraid." Daniel finally looked at him. "I've seen real danger. That wasn't." Silence settled between them, the kind of silence built on mutual understanding. But while peace was growing for some, consequences were unfolding for others. The 3 men from the restaurant had not expected the internet to respond the way it did. At first, they laughed about the video circulating. "It'll blow over," one of them had said confidently. It didn't. Within 48 hours, their employer released a statement condemning their behavior. Suspensions turned into terminations. Screenshots of their mocking comments online surfaced. Old posts filled with arrogance resurfaced too. Reputation, once damaged, rarely returns untouched. The first man, Jason, tried to defend himself publicly. He posted a long message claiming it was taken out of context, but the video was clear enough.